I want to say a few words about the Center for Organizational Ethics, and then I'm going to turn it over to Charlie. Ethics Bowl obviously looms large for the center. We've been hosting Ethics Bowl well, it will be 16 years this November. We were very excited last year because after hosting it for 15 years, Marion's team finally placed. We came in second, and we went to nationals, and they did very well there. So we're excited. We've got more people in the pipeline. So our Ethics Bowl team is growing, and we're really pleased with that. Ethics Bowl is a competition where where the students analyze ethical case studies, and then they face off against each other in demonstrating their expertise in analyzing those case studies. And we have judges who ask them questions and judge their performance. And it's friendly and competitive at the same time. And I think everybody has a good time, and they also learn a lot of critical thinking, public speaking, collaboration. The Ethics Center has a concentration in ethics that students can take to augment their major. I have also initiated a partnership. Actually, I didn't initiate it, the other person did, but we are starting a partnership that we call Partners in Franciscan Leadership, and I'm partnering with the Oldenburg Franciscan Center. So that's something we're starting up. Our kickoff is on September 30th. There are flyers on your table for that. It's going to be a movie night. We're showing the movie Inequality for All. And it features Robert Reich, who was the Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton. So we're kicking that off with kind of a social justice overview. And then we hope to have events every semester and during the summer related to, this is targeted towards people who find themselves in situations in their workplace where their own personal values are being challenged, with the idea of giving them community support, but also some good, strong information and learning experience as well. We also have other public events. The Lead from the Heart Professional Ethics Lecture is in the spring. I collaborate with Pierre Atlas and on a global ethics lecture that is part of his Global Studies lecture series. On March 31st, we are bringing in a retired Major General, Robert Lateef. He is teaching at George Mason University, and he is adjunct at Notre Dame. And he teaches courses on the ethics of war. And his specialty is particularly weapons technology. So we've asked him to talk about weapons technology, but specifically the ethics of drone warfare. So I think that's going to be really interesting. That's on March 31st. So that's just a little bit about the center. I asked Charlie to come speak. Ethics and compliance is obviously the bread and butter of ethical business. It's kind of the practical how-to nuts and bolts. When I'm teaching business ethics, I teach it from a formative perspective, which I think is important with ethics and compliance too. I use this book. My book happens to have a pretty cover on it, my students doesn't. It's called Professional Morality and Guilty Bystanding, Merton's Conjectures and the Value of Work. The author is Barry Paget, who is the chair in business ethics in the College of Business at Belmont University in Nashville. And it's a very valuable book in the sense that it does talk about what it means to be a professional and a business professional with integrity. And he borrows an idea from Lynn Sharp Payne about the distinction between an integrity approach to management and a compliance approach. And prefers the integrity approach because the integrity approach includes compliance, but recognizes that compliance is the beginning and is not the be-all and end-all of being a moral professional with moral integrity. So the reason I specifically asked Charlie to come is that I knew that he would give us an excellent presentation on the practical and ethical aspects of an ethics and compliance training program. But I also knew that he would do it from an integrity perspective, that he would understand that compliance meets the law, but there is also an understanding of the law in terms of its spirit. What is the law for? Because in business, much of government regulations with regard to business ethics has a moral and ethical component underneath it, that we are trying to meet the legitimate interests of business stakeholders while keeping the playing field level so that businesses can compete and the ethical businesses don't suffer at the hands of the ruthless, unethical businesses. And I knew that he would approach this from the spirit of the law and talk to us about compliance with integrity, which is why I invited him. So let me just go right ahead and get into our introduction of Charlie. Charlie Giesting is the Senior Consultant of Global Ethics, Compliance, and Strategy for Integrity Leadership Partners, LLC. Prior to founding ILP, Charlie worked for over 10 years in the business ethics and compliance field, starting with his advancement from a part-time company ombudsman to local ethics officer, and then finally to corporate ethics program manager for Rolls-Royce North America. In addition to providing consulting and management services for his clients, Charlie is active in professional associations, teaches as an adjunct instructor at Indiana Wesleyan University, and is more passionate than ever about helping others by using his leadership knowledge and skills in the areas of business ethics and compliance, organizational development, business strategy formulation, and implementation. Holding a bachelor's degree in engineering management from Purdue University and a master's of business administration from Indiana Wesleyan University, where his class voted him outstanding professional, Giesting founded ILP to help achieve his vision to help companies promote ethical leadership and sound business strategies. So please welcome Charles Giesting.
Thank you, Karen, so much. And thanks to Marion for hosting this and allowing me to come and talk a little bit, share with you guys. Thank you for coming. Taking some time early in the morning, I really do appreciate that. Listening to Karen tell you a little bit about my background reminded me of when I had been an engineer for 22 years with the Allison Company here in town, turned into the Rolls-Royce Company, and got my MBA, gotten my part-time position as an ombudsman for the company. And then there was an opportunity to go into this kind of ethics and compliance work full-time. And I came home and I put it to the dinner table. I had 4 children, and my wife was there, and my second son, I think, was around 10 or 11. And I said, you know, this is going to be a big change for Dad because of the difference between technical things where answers are more black and white and answers that sometimes get gray, and you're not exactly sure, you know, what the best response is. But I said, I think I'm going to go with this major career change. And this second son, Ben, he looked at me and he just said, "Oh, Dad, don't do it." But you know, after 20-some years, and I suspect some of you might be this way too, working in business, you've seen enough things that you think, gosh, I need to make this better. You know, how could we let this happen? Something unethical happen, something maybe illegal that wasn't reported. What can you do to help? And so that's kind of my mission at this point. Today, Karen's asked me to talk mostly about training and communication. So we're going to try to focus on that. We've got a few handouts at the table I'll kind of go through as we go along. I did take off, Karen. This used to say Marion Summer Breakfast. I took this summer. Was it still summer? Okay. Okay, the agenda today, we're going to do a quick scenario review. I'll go through what I think are some learning objectives for us, a little bit about ethical leadership and preparing your organization for that. Federal sentencing guidelines. How many people have heard of the federal sentencing guidelines? Very many? Most? Okay, that's excellent. That'll help us a lot. Some strategic planning tools that you can use. And you know, in the ethics world, you always want to kind of keep things fresh, and new ideas help. I talked to a utilities group through the Ethics and Compliance Officer Association here about 3 weeks ago, and they're very worldwide and yet regionalized, and they're just looking for specific things that each area has a weakness in that they can address. And what kind of strategic planning tools can we have? I don't know that we'll take a break. I see one on here, but we're going to try to keep going. A little bit more on training communication tools. I'll show you some of the things I used when I was at Rolls-Royce and how to address the federal sentencing guidelines and how they say deliver effective training and be able to prove that you've done effective training. Then building goodwill, just a thought there, and then we'll come back to our scenario and then have questions and answers. Any questions or comments about the agenda? Will be okay? Okay. So, the scenario is, and you have this on your table, it's called Welcome to the I Fly High Airline Company. And if you'll take a minute, there's 4 paragraphs here. If you'll take a glance at those. We're not going to discuss this very much here. I just want you to keep these things in mind as we go through the presentation. What's that?
I think I'd go look at the one ads.
Oh, it only gets better. It only gets better. Okay, I see a few of you highlighting, underlining a couple things. So that's good because I'm assuming you see a few ethics issues there somewhere within. Especially ones that you may want to think about addressing at some point. But let's go ahead, and we'll come back to this at the end, but think about a few of these things going on. You're the new Chief Compliance Officer, and all of a sudden, the first day you're thrown into this, and you're thinking, my goodness, how could this company or this organization have an environment where all this could happen on the same morning I show up for work? Be careful, this thing's pretty sensitive, isn't it? Okay, so learning objectives. Let's talk about what ethical leadership is. When I mentioned to my wife I wanted to start a company doing ethical leadership, she goes, nobody knows what that is. And I said, well, that's part of the problem. You know, we need to educate folks on what being a leader in the world of ethics and compliance really is. There's frameworks around that. We'll talk about that. Some useful training communication models. We want to show you some of those, some frameworks, and then try to demonstrate a little bit of understanding of the highlights of the presentation. The vision of Integrity Leadership Partners is really to help companies to promote ethical leadership, sound business strategies. Do those things fit together? They most aptly do. One without the other really doesn't work very well today. The 6 solutions that you see for ethical leadership follows very much, now that I know you guys are familiar with the federal sentencing guidelines, follows very much the 7 steps of the guidelines. And on your tables also is a brochure that is an orange and blue brochure. If you look at the services inside, you'll see these 6 services or solutions. And we're going to talk about A lot of these, especially, we'll talk in here, a little bit on policies and procedures as well. So Karen kind of got this question for me ahead of time. She stole my thunder. But if somebody asks you what the difference between an ethics program of integrity versus one of compliance is, what would you say to them? And I've actually heard a few of you say you work in compliance, not ethics, you work in compliance. Are they connected? What really is the difference between a program of integrity and one of compliance? Have you thought about it that way?
I think a program of integrity is based more in philosophy of the human factor, of how humans, of how to treat humans, how human beings actually behave in the workplace, human nature. Whereas compliance, to me, is much more regulatory.
You're absolutely.
They're integrated. I see the relationship between them.
You are absolutely right. What I wanted to kind of call to mind is, some of you may remember back in the 80s, really the early 80s, hospitals were some of the first ones that had what I would call an integrity code. And usually it was a poster, a one-pager put on the wall, and it said, we will show compassion to all our patients. We will show respect and dignity to everyone, including the employees. Johnson & Johnson, if anybody's familiar with them, they actually had a credo that became very famous in some case studies when Tylenol was being tampered with and ended up poisoning and killing some people. And they looked to their credo. And it was really an integrity code. It didn't really talk much about following the law, following a regulatory regulation or any kind of a corporate policy. Just this is kind of how we are supposed to act and behave. So now what do we have out there today? What do our companies or organizations have out there? Do they have codes of integrity or compliance? Of course, it's both, right? If you look at most codes of conduct today, and I know 95% of organizations have codes today, you will see the very front portion talking about we want to be trustful, respectful, show good citizenship, and those are very important, and that's why they put it up front. This is the most important, as Karen's talking about. The spirit of all this is even more important than the compliance that comes under it. However, in these codes, 85% of the content of these codes of conduct is compliance. And why is that? Because we've become a very technical, very complicated, complex society. We're moving very quickly. Rules change, laws are updated, and so we've got to make sure our guys know the rules. How many times have you heard an employee say, "Well, I didn't know that was against the rules"? I've heard it several times. You know, well, how do we get them trained? How do we get communicated to them what they need to know? So, with that regard, how would you define ethical leadership? If you break it down, when you talk about ethics, you talk about all these things we talked about in integrity mode. You know, maybe ideas on diversity, individual rights. We get into philosophers, Immanuel Kant, and John Locke, and several folks. Leadership, we talk about not just managing now. We're stepping out with a vision. Okay, is it clear? Are we sharing the vision? How do we deal with conflicts of interest? We expect the leader to show leadership when he does that. So, ethical leadership. Okay. The other big idea, I guess, see if I get this thing to work here. Motivated. Leaders are expected to motivate. If you're a leader and you can't motivate your people, you're in trouble. Okay, you've got to be able to motivate them. You've got to be able to share a vision. Here we go. So where to begin? You've got a leader statement and a vision. Most of your codes of conduct, probably, not all, but if it's been written in the last 10 years, it probably has a statement, a letter from your president or CEO that talks about how supportive they are and their expectations of behavior of their employees for this code of conduct. I list these things here because these are typical code elements. Some codes will have up to 30 different elements, and I'm sure you've seen some of them. Equal employment practices. You know, we want to make sure we treat, we follow EEO guidelines. Now, if you're a global company, EEO may not mean anything in Germany or France or China. So you have to talk about equal employment in different words and in more general terms and in more international rules and laws. So keep that in mind as well. Privacy, huge. Who was it? President Bush said the next decade would be spent on just privacy. That would be a major topic, and he was right. You know, look at some of the things that are going on where customer data is being pilfered by folks from companies like Target or Home Depot. Promoting a positive work environment. Now, is that against the law to not promote a positive work environment? Not necessarily. That would be really an integrity issue right here. Conflicts of interest could be legal or not. Some could be legally bound to not have a conflict of interest. And others would be just whatever your company is saying a conflict of interest is. Gifts and hospitality. Let's see, accuracy of records. Protecting assets, proprietary information. I can tell you internationally, that's one of the most important elements in a code is protecting your policies and procedures to protect proprietary information. The quality of products and services is typically covered in a code. So some of these issues are the same ones that you read about in our first scenario. Okay, so where to begin? Does it start with the top leader? It really does. We talk about, I used to think that if you could bubble this up from the grassroots, that's the way to go, you know. And it's not bad, but it really has to start with the top leader because everybody looks to them, right? They have the vision, they have the motivation, they have that positional power that they really have to use. They have to be on fire for ethics and compliance to work. And they have to talk about it all the time. I'll never forget, we had about 250 managers sitting in, our top managers, sitting in an auditorium, and the CEO was there, and he said, we will do whatever it takes to make these end-of-month numbers, whatever it takes. And I was so happy when his assistant, his lieutenant, stood up and said, and he was in the very back of the room, and he was kind of quiet when he said it, but he stood up and he said, excuse me, as long as it's legal and ethical. And I thought, wow, that took a lot of courage from him, because I knew some of the other stuff he was dealing with. That took a lot of courage. Sometimes ethics does. So what does the code say? Is it up to date? And you can look at a lot of your competitors, other people that have codes out there. What are they including in their codes? How are they moving? You should be watching that. Full commitment required. You got to motivate the managers to bring the code to life. You know, Enron, everybody remembers Enron, 2001, 2002. They had a pretty good code. They had good elements in their code. They had leader statements. But the leaders were lying to the people. Why is ethical leadership more important now than ever before in all of our history? Everyone's heard the book, The World is Flat. The advent of the computer and the internet, and someone sitting in Bangalore, India that can get an education, maybe not quite on par with some of our top U.S. universities, but maybe not too far from it. They have access to the materials. They can get it quickly. They can do research. So it's flat. We're hyper-competitive in our marketplace. We want to decrease the pressure of some of these things you see in our first three bullets here. Productivity and effectiveness. We know it's out there every day because of this hyper-competitive world. Everything is brought down to $1 per patient or $1 per unit. What's the cost? What's the markup? What's the margin? Each one has some kind of a legal or ethical implication, which leads to liabilities. And those liabilities, what do they end up being? Lawsuits, right? A lot of money. And even if they don't win the lawsuit, what are you spending? This is, gosh, probably 6, 7 years ago, I read that the average HR lawsuit on harassment was costing companies like $112,000. So somebody raises their hand to the EEOC downtown and they say, you know, and the EEOC says, yeah, you may have a case, we'll go forward. All of a sudden, what's that put into motion? Your employment counsels get busy, your investigators get busy, it all takes time and money. So lots of international, federal, state rules. There are tons. Besides the federal sentencing guidelines, there are SOX. For you guys accountants, right? Sarbanes-Oxley, the senator and congressman that put together the rules after Enron on how CFOs and presidents and companies would report their financials on a quarterly basis. Also, SOX actually required if you were traded on a major U.S. exchange that you would publish a code of conduct on the internet for your investors to see. I thought that made a statement about ethics and compliance. Social media today, we talk about the leaders being powerful, but you know, it's starting that this, because of the connectivity and people getting on social media, and you could do a YouTube. I remember the one, United Airlines, the guy, they had broken his guitar in the handling his luggage. Did anybody remember seeing this?
Yeah.
6, 7 years ago, it ran like millions of hits. And they kind of went to customer service and he said, well, you guys broke my guitar. And they said, well, you shouldn't have, you didn't follow our rules.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't pack it in a way that, you know. And he goes, but you broke my guitar. And so they kind of blew him off again. And then all of a sudden, here's this YouTube that's gone viral. You think that hurt their reputation? Greatly, greatly. So what power can you have at the bottom today? You can have more than what you used to have. And generational differences, we see those. I see it in my own children. I'm trying to catch up with them in certain things. I remember 5 years ago getting one of my first digital phones, and I was, if I asked for someone's phone number, I always, well, do you have a pen? I'd write it down. Until I watched my kids, and now they just pull out their phone and punch it in. So I could do that too, and then I have, you know. But that kind of starts you thinking a little bit differently. How do they think? They've grown up in a different time. I don't know if you can read this from the back, but this kind of talks to the generational thing a little bit and what's going on in today's environment. It says individuals and families, they're finding that the pace of change exceeds their physical and mental capacity to cope with it. And as they experience change accelerating, they tend to feel overwhelmed and even alienated. They experience what sociologists call anomie, a state of being characterized by the lack of social norms or anchors of stable and shared values. They want more time with their families, but feel compelled to work longer hours, make more money, get their needs taken care of. They espouse diversity, but they push other cultures to do it the American way. Does that sound kind of accurate? Where are we going? You know, I know in my own lifetime how I was raised with very faithful values in a really religious home. That's not out there in many, many homes today. I'd say the majority. And so the values that I had instilled early on, they're not in a lot of young folks. But they're looking for some values. I really think they are. And sometimes in the corporate world, that's one of our best opportunities to grab them. And yes, we're not going to promote a certain religion, one over another, but you got to know that most of our rules and laws are based on different philosophies that were based, whether it's Christian or some of even the Old Testament stuff that's out there. So where are we going? So with all that in mind, I did put a few Wall Street Journals out on the table with some of these articles, just to draw attention a little bit. Just a few weeks ago, well, this was right before the summer session. Caterpillar was in the news. Now, Caterpillar is up the road at Peoria, Illinois, not very far from here. About 40,000 employees. Actually, that's a few years ago. They may have more than that now because Caterpillar was on a kind of like Cummins, on a goal to really double in size over like 10-year period of time. And I think they're falling short a little bit, but that was their vision. In this situation, there was a Progress Rail Services, which was a subsidiary of Caterpillar, doing work on rail cars, and they were under pressure to get more work, get more revenue. So what did they do? If they had to repair a railroad car, they would go ahead and say, well, you know what, is that wheel broken? And one guy winks, the other guy says, no, it's not broken. Yeah, it's broken, all right. And they pull it off, and then they would charge that customer back for repairing that wheel. Not unlike a casebook study that Sears Automotive did in California some years, 20 years ago, where you pull your car in, and do you need brakes? Well, of course you need brakes. Do you need a new whatever, a new alternator? Yeah, you need a new alternator too. And they make up these things. So what causes that? Certain people know that's wrong. Only fix what's really broken. But it's being driven by that profit motive. Managers saying, we've got to meet this amount of revenue, this amount of market. Duke Energy, conflict of interest. Now, this isn't family now. We talk about family issues of conflicts of interest. There are at least a half a dozen different types of conflicts of interest that are typically in conflict of interest policies. This one got the chief legal counsel for the state's regulatory agency in trouble. Does anybody remember this? Not very long ago. Here he was presiding over cases for Duke, and then lo and behold, all of a sudden Duke hires him. And when you look back at the cases, Duke always won those cases. Something's wrong there. Does that dictate that there should be a new rule or law that says, 3 years after you leave the state, you can't hire on with a contractor? I think there is actually a law like that, but I think it's less than 3 years. I think it's like 6 months.
They can wait that. That's the news lately, is that a lot of these people did that. Their bosses waived that it was okay.
Oh, they waived it, okay.
They waived it, so they didn't have to wait for a year or whatever.
Shame on some of those bosses.
Yeah, so it's just like, well, what was the rule? Just wait.
If you're not gonna do it. El Paso Corporation, I actually knew an ethics officer there. El Paso doesn't exist anymore. She was a great gal. Her name was Misty. And I'm not sure what happened to her. She wasn't involved in this, but there was a fellow in California that was manipulating gas prices out there, gas supplies, to make the demand go up and charge more to customers. And they caught him doing it. He made up records. He did not do accurate, complete records. He made them up. Here's one really local. So before I moved to Plainfield, Indiana, where I live now, I lived down in Shelby County, near a small town called Waldron. And this was in the news about a little over a year ago. There's a little furniture company there that takes hickory wood and they make some furniture, and they sold a bunch to the U.S. Army. Well, they got to contracting with a captain of the Army that was stationed in Germany, and the owner of this flat rock furniture company in Waldron, Indiana, 50 miles from there, ended up paying him some gratuities, doing some gifts, payments that he should have done. It was against the law. Did they know it? I don't know, but they were found guilty of that. And you can find these. If you Google all these, you can find the stories. Yahoo, not long ago, and I've seen this one happen. You think this never happens? CEO Thompson was hired by Yahoo to lead that whole company. And then they find out that he lied on his resume that I had this computer science degree he never had. All of a sudden, that's a big deal. It's a big deal. The company Yahoo has done their Securities Exchange Commission filings that here's our president, here's his background, this is all fair, and everybody should accept this, and it wasn't true. And it kind of put an egg thrown right at the board of directors, because what was the vetting process? What was the review process for these folks? So nightmares. Oh, nightmares. And you hope this isn't happening to you. You want to wake up. This is not a nightmare. But if you thought about it, what would be the headline in the newspaper tomorrow morning about your organization? The worst thing that could possibly happen. And then you say, oh, I don't want that to happen. So can I do anything at all to mitigate it or to plan ahead, to plan that this doesn't happen? And I go back to really the 4 functions of good management, right? We want to plan, we want to organize, lead, control, and then we want to repeat that. Okay, those are the four functions. So here's this actually happened here a few miles from here too, some years ago. I was actually at one of my kids' basketball games, and it was summertime. The coach of the high school was there. A player came in and he said, "Coach, do I really have to show up at 6 o'clock in the morning in the weight room to work out in the summer so I can be on the team this fall, on the football team?" And the coach said, "Well, no, you don't." And the guy's going, "Great! You only have to play. You only have to come and work out in the weight room if you actually want to play in the game. But we have room for you to sit on the sidelines." That's what he's saying. So what should be done for you to prepare for potentially your worst nightmare if you want to play? If you want to play, not sit on the sideline. Federal sentencing guidelines were created in 1991. I don't know if anybody remembers. I'll throw in another one here. In 1977, there was an act called the FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Has anyone heard of that one? A couple of you. 1977. Do you know what precipitated the FCPA Act from being passed? The major issue is, as I understand it, and I wasn't close to it then, but I've read about it since, is that Lockheed Martin, which is now like our largest defense contractor in the country, was trying to sell a model plane called the L-1011 to the Japanese government, and some of the officials in the Japanese government said, if you would pay us like $5 million, just to us personally, we will make sure that you get this contract for this number of planes. And Lockheed looked at it, and they knew if they got this contract, they would be able to keep a factory of 4,000 employees working. So they reasoned we should do this. There was not a law against it. However, after that, after it all came down, they did get the contract. The U.S. government looked at it and said, something's wrong here. We're buying business, and we should be competing on a level playing field. So they created the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that says you cannot bribe a foreign official, pay them anything of value in return for a part of business. Well, that's 77. So our government is starting to think about what's a level playing field and how do we get that to work in the business community. They started to see people being prosecuted, and it led in 1991 to the federal sentencing guidelines, which said to judges, this is in chapter 8 actually of these guidelines, to federal judges, that when you prosecute people for federal crimes, we want to give you some guidelines. And they actually come up with a score, like a culpability score. You have mitigating circumstances and prosecuting circumstances, and you can either make your cases better or worse, and your fines, things like that, based on how you run your company. So let me go on here, because I'll come to this in the next slide or so. But they are non-mandatory rules. So people say, well, they're required. I said, no, they're not required. The federal sentencing guidelines are not required. However, to me, organizations would be very well to do to prepare for that worst nightmare by having these in place and having a program set up with this kind of framework. It applies to not just profit corporations, but nonprofits, trusts, partnerships, just about any kind of organizations. Universities, applies to universities. The penalties that the government can dole out: restitution, remedial orders, community service, substantial fines. Reminds me of one of the grandfathers, or grandmothers, I guess, of ethics and compliance is a person that Karen mentioned, Lynn Sharp Payne. Very famous, has written lots of articles on organizational integrity. And one that she has put forward that I have a copy on my bookshelf, very clearly has shown that if you can have ethics and compliance program in place that follows the framework of the Federal Sentencing Guidelines, you can reduce your fine by up to 90%. So if you are caught in a criminal act, disobeying a rule, a law, regulation, you can reduce your fine a lot. That's worth something. What are these Federal Sentencing Guidelines? I'm probably talking to the choir here, but I'll run through them real quick and then I'll flip through the next slides a little quicker. But first off, they say they're going to look at your organization and they're going to say, do you have a tailored to your organization now set of standards and procedures that are available to your employees and agents, other people you do business with? Where are your policies and procedures? And if you don't have that book, you know, there might be at least 30 major policies that you're looking for in running your business, you should be asking questions. High-level personnel must be responsible for ethics and compliance. This was an addition in like 2004 to the guidelines. So the guidelines in 1991 initially were really hyped on criminal conduct. Since 2004, with amendments then and since then, they are now calling very specifically ethics and compliance programs. They are talking about having high-level personnel responsible for ethics and compliance programs at your company. So you should have a chief compliance officer named, even a small company. And it may be a dual role, like when I started as an ombudsman, that probably took me 5 to 10% of my time. I was still working as an engineer when I started that role. But it made that statement. We have someone working as responsible for ethics and compliance. Due care must be taken with those given discretionary authority. What does that mean? In this one, I'm still learning about it, but I can tell you that if you have a CFO that is somehow hidden in some background check that he was, just like this Thompson that gave a fraudulent resume. He was caught embezzling funds at 3 companies ago and 4 states over. Shame on you, We have ways of doing background checks now that we should be able to uncover those kind of things. But it's saying that those folks that are in higher levels of management, you need to do really good background checks. And then, not just do it once, but what we're finding is these guidelines have been amended again and again, and they're asking us to do more risk assessments. We're finding companies every 3 to 5 years, they're doing a background check again. By claims of one company I talked to, they're saying they're getting hits on 40% of the people they're doing background checks on that have already been employed by the company. You passed your background check, you hired, you're doing fine, but we got to run another background check 5 years hence. And all of a sudden now we find out, maybe it's drinking while driving or something. You're getting a hit that you've been convicted of some crime somewhere else. So effective training and communications, this bottom one here. Effective, what does that mean? Does that mean to show if there are 100 people in your company that you get all 100 of them to this training, whatever it is, for this year? Is it annual? Is it quarterly? It's supposed to be periodically. Most companies have at least an annual ethics, even small ones. But besides completeness, how can you prove that they actually got it? Some companies are saying, well, we tested that. We give them a test, a quiz at the end. Okay, what's the score? Do they all get 100, or do they repeat until they get 100? How do you do that? How would you, if you were tasked to say, I have an effective ethics and compliance training program, how would you be able to prove that? That's what you got to think about. There are some companies out there that are going to great lengths to help others do that. Monitoring and auditing your ethics compliance program to detect criminal behavior. I'll never forget walking into a company that had about 1,100 employees. We had just, actually it was a joint venture for us. We owned 50% with another defense contractor. They were in the middle of a prosecution. It was a very serious offense. And they knew they were in trouble. But the government prosecutors were starting to ask questions about the ethics compliance program. And they said, well, how have you been doing this? They said, well, we have ethics training every year. Okay. Can I see that? Can I talk to some of the people? And as I got there, I found out it was the exact same menu, it was the same program every year. The test was the same. In fact, one of the guys said there's 10 multiple choice questions. I already know the answers from last year. I just go in and circle B, C, D, and I go through it. So my next question this was the CFO at the time, who was supposedly the chief compliance officer as well. I said, well, how many issues have been brought to your table? You have a hotline or some kind of whistleblower line. How many have you had, like in the last, couple of years? And he hesitated for a moment and he said, haven't gotten any calls. And I'm not sure if he looked at me and thought, oh, this is good, because I didn't have any problems. I said, that should have been a sure sign something was amiss. Something was amiss. My experience is that somewhere between, if you have 1,000 employees, you should expect at least between 15 to 20 issues coming to your desk a year. 15 to 20, and that's just alleged violations. You should be getting probably double or triple that in questions. Hey, I'm not sure this is the right response for our company from an ethical point of view or legal point of view. Can you help me? You should be getting lots of questions. So this needs to go on. The only way that goes on, if you have support from the top for the whole program, and that you actually have a program set up and somebody to call. This next one must be promoted. It's got to be promoted, consistently enforced. And this is the sad truth sometimes is the junior employee, the guy that graduates from Marion University, goes over to work at the corporation, and he's caught using the computer after work to go to X-rated videos. He's terminated. 3 weeks later, Vice President of Sales, been there 30 years. We've looked at the computer, it's the same thing. What should happen to him? Should be terminated as well. Some companies will, some companies won't. But the fact is here that the guidelines tell us to be consistent in our sanctions or punishments against employees. Okay? Be consistent. And I've talked to HR folks time and time again, and they say, well, every situation is a little unique. Maybe it is. But there are some bright lines on certain issues. And then the last one here from report, steps must be taken to prevent violations. So whatever your culture at your business is producing, as far as goodness or badness, number of violations, you should look at those and say, how can I change my culture to reduce this amount of violations? How can I eliminate that? And hopefully that's built in your program. So that's the 7 steps. That's kind of explain these next couple slides, so I'm going to go through these a little quickly. I said that. So let's talk about some strategic tools. Okay, so you're the training guy, and if you were going to, if you were in charge of setting up training and communications as a chief compliance officer for your company, what would be your first thought? How are you going to do it?
You want to assess your current state.
Assess your current state, yeah. Figure out what you need. You know maybe what kind of business you're in, but what do your employees have? What kind of training have they had before? What are those kind of things? So you may want to think about a cultural assessment. And thinking about our generational differences that are in the workplace now. A lot of folks say, we're up to 5 generations in the workplace at the same time in the same corporation. That's almost what is unheard of. It's unprecedented because folks are living longer, right? A lot of them are working longer. So you got 21, 22-year-olds working with 65-year-olds. And gosh, how those folks grew up in differences. So maybe an assessment. Compliance and ethics, specific risk assessment. So if you think of all the elements in your code of conduct, and how can I assess where I am on each one of those? How accurate and complete am I with my records, and how would I assess that? Maybe it's IT security. How would I assess that for potential breach of privacy or other issues in IT? Look at past, current, internal concerns. So just like the 7 steps said, you know your company, you know you've had some issues in the past. What are they? Because you should be learning from them. What is my industry competitor doing? You know, I could bet you that probably when the article came out about Caterpillar, Cummins went through their place quickly and sent emails. If I were general counsel, I would. Are we doing this too? Are you checking your books? Are you making sure our repair people are not, you know, double booking and making up repairs? That's the way it kind of works. You look at your industry peers. And then you look at future trends. Are there some new rules or laws that are getting ready to be passed? How will that affect your company? So the cultural assessment, here's just maybe some sample questions you might want to think about. Do people know the vision? You know, it's interesting if you ask in my teaching with Indiana Wesleyan, you ask a class, do you know your company's mission? Most will nod their head. And then I say, well, okay, tell me what it is. And most cannot say it. I did have one, though. I was very proud of him. He worked for the, here in town, Future Farmers of America, the FFA, which is the national headquarters, right? He steeled it off, and it was like 10 lines long. I said, I'm impressed. You know the mission, you know the vision. This is what we're shooting for. Get the target board out. That's it. Is it clear? What you'll find out, I think, is that a lot of your employees may not really understand, and that's important. How well is top management commitment displayed? Are there actually communication memos, parts of policies? What's coming out that talks about your vision and the commitment to compliance and ethics? How would you rate the culture based on respect for individuals? That usually comes down to a personal thing. You know, for all the people around me, yeah, they're treated fine. But for maybe somebody over in one corner of the company, they see somebody being abused. Maybe it's psychological harassment by a supervisor. They see it and nothing is being done about it. They're not going to assess your culture very well there. How about accuracy of reporting? Yeah, we do really good till the end of the reporting period, and then well, we fudge numbers. We kind of estimate high usually. You know, whatever. That's kind of our culture here. How do you communicate the desired culture with newcomers? You got new employees. How are you bringing them in to think the way you want them to think? Have you seen unethical business practices in the last 12 months? Be a good question to ask. And have you reported those acts in the last 12 months? So, cultural assessment. Now, if you talk a little bit more about compliance and ethics risk assessment, you look at these kind of questions. Again, it kind of follows a lot of the elements inside your code. It helps prioritize. Always think this. If you can find out where in your code you think you're falling short on being able to comply with a certain element, you know, your policy on antitrust says this, and you're not sure in this region of the country or region of the world that you're actually following that policy or rule, then maybe you should take whatever budget money you have and come up with a special training course, or maybe send out one of your attorneys or one of your trainers to focus on just the people that need that type of training. And it also provides, this is good, an affirmative defense if there's an alleged deficiency. So in 2004, Federal Sentencing Guidelines said that periodically, it didn't tell us to do it every 2 years or 5 years, it just said periodically, you need to assess your compliance and ethics program and all those elements. So it's a way to say, yeah, we've been doing it. Now, if you missed something and something really bad happened, at least you can say, I was proactive, I was doing this, and hopefully it's an isolated situation. So the other one here is just talks about the effectivity. Here's just the 7 steps, the ethics and risk assessment process. This is the process that we use at ILPartners when we go through a company. Now this, I don't know if you can see this all the way from the back. Stacy, can you see it a little bit? And way in the back. But this is a spreadsheet that kind of put together. Let's see if I can. What I put down is my compliance and ethics risk assessment, a way to keep track of things. If you have your set of policies, whatever, tailored to your business, listed down this left-hand column, here I started with employment practices, but it could be anything. and then come over here and somehow you need to assess your risk. I actually define this. I don't have a slide on it here, but I try to define it for companies. If you think your risk is low, that would be something that would cost your company less than, say, $10,000. It would not be in the local or national news. Certain things would apply if it's a low risk in your mind. And that goes up into medium and high, where high is if this gets exposed, it is your worst nightmare. It costs your company over $100,000. It's going to be in the national news, state and national news, maybe even international news. That could be a high impact, and I judge it by the low with 1x, a medium with 2x, and a high impact or a high risk with 3x's. And I've seen a lot of people do it with 5 numbers in a scale. You can do as many as you think you need. This is kind of a simplified format, if you will, but it can be effective. So this is the risk of the probability of occurrence of this. This is the risk for financial and reputational risk if something goes wrong in any one of these code elements. And then I also ask, when I go through, I talk about training, and I try to get a reasonable set of survey respondents, if you will. Depends on the company, depends on how it's organized. You want something that is reflective of the population, basically. And what kind of training do you think is lacking here that you need? And if you get a survey of 35 folks, and 30 of the 35 say, yeah, we need harassment training, that's probably a pretty good indication. Something needs to be done there. It could reduce your risk. I didn't put any grid lines here, but basically things in the upper right. This is it's a classical impact up here in the upper left and likelihood here chart that says if this is a high likelihood this could occur and the impact is great. I actually call this my heat map. This is the upper left quadrant of this, if you can think of low, medium, and high risk, a 3x3 matrix. The upper right is in red. That's hot. That means I need to address something immediately. If it's a low impact, it's low likelihood to happen. It could, but it's not likely. Then no, I don't have time to even think about that today. I have to think about the ones that are medium, medium-high, and high impact and likelihood. So it's a risk analysis grid that we use. So questions about any of the risk stuff there?
I have a question about the risk analysis. So would you take a single risk analysis grid for each issue, each ethical issue that you have on the previous slide?
Actually, you can't. Well, you could do it that way if you could break it down that way. But I've seen it where you actually take all the elements. Like say you have 25 elements in your code, you can put all 25 dots on
So
here.
it gives you that overall perspective.
You can use it that way. The one company I used it with here recently was they didn't realize IT was that important to them. And they're a smaller company, 400 employees, but they're growing, and IT is becoming a big issue. And they kind of knew it, but they didn't realize how at risk they were. And so all of a sudden that showed up in the upper right-hand corner as a high risk, high likelihood that something could be breached here the way they were handling data. So okay, we need to address that. So they've been working now very feverishly. Does that answer that? And Jean, you answer?
Yeah, I was reading trying to get a feel for the charts. I wasn't really picking up everything you were saying, but in an organization, you were talking about getting a good sample. How deep into the organization do you go, or what are your parameters for who gets the assessment?
I think every organization is unique and should be talked to. The textbooks would say that where it's reasonable to use some statistics. statistical analysis to prove to yourself at which confidence level, if it's 95% confident,
Yeah.
you have 5,000 employees. But you know, my experience is that, especially in companies that have multiple locations or lots of employees in different areas of business, they're run by different managers and different locales, geographies, different cultures. And so I would really want to take more of almost a unique approach. I know from a statistical sample in manufacturing, I always wanted at least 30 samples to know that,
Yeah.
hey, is this really working or not?
It just seems like the higher up you go in the organization, it's possible you're going to get a less truthful answer. Because I can see where a manager would say, well, that's not a problem, or, you know, but you get the guy, you know, at the bottom of the food chain saying, you know, it's all over the place, kind of thing, so.
I totally understand. Yeah. Yes.
To weigh in on it, I think it becomes a perspective, because to your point, the higher up you are, you could be in that rarefied air where you don't know whether you could well be insulated from what's really going on. Okay, so the cross section, you do it at top level, mid level, and then you get into the field. And if the perspective of the field is that we're not an ethical company, then whether you are or not, if that's their perspective, you're not an ethical company. You may be, but not in their eyes. So it's that cross section that becomes important.
Yeah, that's a great point. One time I had the opportunity to ask a group of, these were energy. Rolls-Royce had several different sectors of business. One was energy and power generation. This is probably a good question for you guys too. I said, here's the scenario. If you walk out of this professional association conference and you happen to just see that your competitors' next year's marketing plan is laying on the table, what would you do with it? And the reply was, and these were, we get it and we digest it and we know exactly what they're doing. And I said, that's exactly the wrong answer. You know, you should be putting that in a vanilla envelope, not looking at it beyond the title and giving it to legal counsel. But they didn't. I think part of that was just ignorance, maybe. Or maybe the competitive drive that just says, we always want to know competitive intel. Well, you're allowed to know competitive intel, what you're allowed to see, what's on the public newsstands and things like that. But some of it is education.
So I'm a firm believer in an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure.
Yeah.
So it seems to me there should be some way to assess people and where their morals are and where their values are, and to get a handle on that, because I don't think you can regulate morality. I think that you have to hire people who have high standards. And whoever was that answered that they get it and take, you know, that's a standard that he has or she has to be highly competitive and top edge without thinking about what you do to people in the meantime. So I guess my question isn't there some way that you could do some kind of assessment before you even hire a person to find out how they would answer that kind of question, or so that you don't have to get in there and then deal with every decision they make down the line that's going to be unethical or questionable? Or
There are a few companies out there that do industrial psychological assessments, especially for like director level and up. But my experience is there are very minority companies that do that. Most of the time they're looking at resumes and past records and where you've been and what your numbers have been and how you did it. But there are tests out there, and there are some companies that have done it. I could do some research. But there are, and it goes back to like how you grew up, how would you make this decision and give you a scenario, and it's pretty comprehensive, some of these industrial psychologist tests. A behavioralist, I guess you'd call it.
I think it's also assessing somebody's ethics is pretty notoriously difficult to do because it's so subjective. You know, it's a little bit like being the mind police. I think you can ask certain questions, and probably some of these tests do, But a lot of times people lie on the tests. They know what they're going after and they lie. So it's kind of fraught with a lot of difficulty.
I think another dimension, that was a really good point. I'm a dean here, which means I'm a petty bureaucrat. But this is really a good point. But so we're coming from a university, but there are obviously analogies here with corporations and so on. But one thing that I see is going back to your earlier idea of cooperative vision. I think that was one of your phrases that you used. To create a culture of integrity, I think employees, everyone needs to share a vision of what that corporation, that company, that business, that college is seeking. And it seems to me that it's almost systemic. When you bring people into a cooperative environment where they see that they are a part of this, I think that may be the problem with Enron and Fastow and those guys. They're always going to be rogues. They weren't a part of a larger vision, and it seems that that's a way to address the question that we have in hiring too, as well. If you give them that and make them feel a part of that, and I'm talking all the way across every worker on the campus, everyone is a part of it. Now we can do that perhaps maybe a little bit easier than the business down the road can do that. I fully understand that, but I think that's
a good point.
Something.
That's a good point. And you know, how much of it is like an influenza that if you catch it and the leader, you have this brazen leader that goes out and is speaking the good words. How will the population take that in and then even put peer pressure on one another?
Well, there is, and there's something to be said about the old-fashioned shame culture.
Yes, peer pressure, shame culture.
We can do it at a university a little bit. Students will develop that. And if you get a shame culture, then a lot of these problems are taken care of. But that's a real challenge. So.
In the business world, I can tell you it's a very good challenge. Very good.
I think the key word there is culture. And we tried 3 different tests, and they were right half the time.
Really?
Yeah. If you guessed, you'd be right half the time. So I'm not too sure it was effective, but what was effective is taking the time to build that into the culture. Because what happens, it takes time, but what happens is the staff themselves won't accept the behavior. And when that happens, you've just crossed the line. You've just made it, because if the organization itself has the culture of high ethics, high morality, you're on.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's
but now it's hard to keep, but you're there. But it takes time.
It does. It does.
That's where it's top down, I think.
It's like a plant. It takes a lot of nurturing.
Exactly.
A lot of nurturing. Any other questions on risk? Yeah, Kid Stacy.
Just a quick thought, it's a question. I've been fortunate to serve on diversity councils with senior leaders, and just to look at managing diversity and talent, et cetera. But here's my struggle. So the policies like companies I work for look great, and they do a great job in helping educate the masses. But here's the disconnect. So when we get to middle management and lower management, we manage the metrics, and they're important, right? We have to measure quality in these things. But at the end of the day, in a lot of instances, the casualties are numerous, although the metrics look great. So what are you seeing with respect to how are organizations starting to identify, accept that there are some issues there, so that the practices and people who are engaged in doing the work are actually following these things and they're not just being driven for productivity?
I think one of the things that comes to mind, and this has been kind of a point of contingency with some companies, but remember I said, whatever your culture produced, good, bad, or indifferent, you feed that back to the employees. And so you know that you had a senior manager embezzling funds or taking inventory and doing something with it he should have done. How can you get that back? Well, if you change the names, dates, places, if you're a big enough concern, kind of flavor it so other people can say, you know, this happened somewhere in my company. I can't tell where, but it happened. Then you start to say, don't do this. Don't do that. Again, you know, we had, one thing I tried to do, I had 12 scenarios in a newsletter. 11 of these things actually happened. But we changed names, dates, places, and they were serious offenses. And we just kind of said to people, how would you apply our ethics code and principles to address the situation if it happened to you? Put yourself in those shoes. And but the legal counsel, they start to squirm because they're afraid somebody's going to come back and say, well, you're talking about me. You know, you're talking about my son. I've had that too. You know, the mother and the son. I didn't know the mother would. All of a sudden, what are you doing to my son? You know, it's supposed to be confidential programming and all that, but of course we can't guarantee confidentiality. They are confidential programs. However, we know that sometimes people leak things. Hopefully, I always think, and I know the lawyers think this way too, is that truth is a defense. If it is truthful that you did this, then that you should not be complaining. You know, if you think it's you, but your name and date and place, it's all different. So, but how do you feed that back into the culture and then say to the culture, shame on you if someone gets caught doing this again? I think those are pretty effective. Can be. Good question. Other things? Yeah, Tina.
Just real quickly, something that caught my eye when you were going through earlier, and it's just a CPA in me, that we were talking about budgets. And now, do you look at the budget that's being allocated to this? Because to me, if top management's got posters all over the place and this is their vision and everybody knows it by heart, but they're allocating 0.5% to the area, I mean, it kind of sounds like, yeah, we'll talk the talk, but when it comes down to actually putting our money in that area, well, maybe we're not going to do that. I mean, is that something that
I know that in the federal sentencing guidelines, some of the folks that have been hired now by prosecutors, because there are some experts in the country now on this, and if you're being prosecuted, the federal judge doesn't have time to come look at your company, organization per se, but there's Joe and there's Wynn and there's some other guys I know. They've actually been hired. You go into that company, you can find out what they're spending on the budget. You want to find out, talk to the employees, what's going on, check their policies and procedures, all these things we're talking about. And then budget becomes a good question, because then is it, you know, what size company are you and what % of the budget is being spent on ethics and compliance? Then all of a sudden companies, oh yeah, that's part of ethics and compliance. It's an important thing. I don't know a lot of people realize that they could be taken to task if they're prosecuted on budget. Okay, so let me check my time here. We are about quarter till, so we're going to try to wrap this in less than 15 minutes. We'll go pretty quickly, and then we'll have a few more questions at the end. So past, current, internal concerns, cases, we've talked about that a little bit. I think one of the important ones here is, what is your culture of speaking up? You know, do you really have this non-retaliation policy? Everybody has one. Is it real? I can tell you that the fear of retaliation is alive and well, and it's probably even more alive than it was 5 years ago. And you'll never see anything in writing that Jim reported this, and Jim 3 years later no longer works here, or Jim has been pushed to the side, he's no longer on this management track. It happens. It's not in writing, but we know he was the one that turned this in to this. Maybe it was an outside agency, maybe he called the ethics line, something. He was the initiator. So that's a tough one. Do we need more training? Is there a trend here? False Claims Act says that, especially thinking of, I forget your first name. Crystal working with national government agency here, Medicare. False Claims Act is extremely important to her, and she may very well be doing annual training for people just to say, this is how important this is, that every record that we keep is accurate and complete when it goes to end up getting charged back to the government. So, you know, you need to analyze what trends do you see. I used to look at, I had 13 categories of different offenses when I was in the corporate world, and I looked at by location, and then totals, aggregates, were certain things growing or going down, which location. I had one location I remember we just had a lot of harassment claims, and it told me we need to be doing so. There's probably a leader up here that's causing a lot of it, and there was one of the top leaders was his whole persona. But anyway, what are you going to do to address that? You know, it's very clear on the charts. Here's where the calls are coming from. Here's where I'm spending my time. So you need to look at those kind of things. Industry issues. You know, the Caterpillar is probably a good example. Cummins the same way. They had these grand plans to double their size in 5 years. And if you've been reading some of the international stuff with Cummins in China, they've been backing off a lot of where they had hoped to be. Well, Caterpillar's a direct competitor to them. So what's going on with Cummins is probably some of what's also going on with Caterpillar. A lot of cost pressures right now. They've planned for a big future, and it's not quite being visualized yet. Benchmarking sometimes can help you where your company fits in. Do you really want to be the purple elephant in front of a federal prosecutor? You don't. You know, you don't want to stand and say, "Oh, my program's totally different than everyone else's. We're unique." No, that is exactly the opposite of what you want to say. So you want to tell them you follow the guidelines. Future trends. What kind of investigations? I heard this is a number of years ago when I was at the National Ethics and Compliance Officer Association. I met my first lady who had worked for the SEC. And I said, "Well, what's new at the SEC?" And she goes, "Well, we have recs out, open recs to hire 800 new employees." Thought for a second, I said, "Whoa, that could be a trend, right?" Because what are they going to do with these people? They're going to be out scouring all these people that are listed on these stock exchanges and making sure all their paperwork is correct and all their K10 reports are right, all these things. Scary stuff. Technology changes. We've seen that with how data moves. Credit cards is one. Target got caught not long ago. What's that? Less than a year ago.
Yeah, home improvement.
Home Depot. Yeah, that's an article being passed around here too. Okay, the planning stage. So once you get all this data together, you want to organize it, try to understand, synthesize it, take a half a step backward. What is it trying to tell you? What areas of training and communication provide the most benefit to mitigate the most risk, right? I had a guy, attorney call me up and say, "Turley, I have 3 guys going to China on Monday, and I need them to have FCPA training immediately. Is there anything you can provide me?" I said, "Yeah, we have something to get it to you." But sometimes it's like, he recognized there's a great risk here. Okay, China, we know, is very high on the corrupt index. Transparency International has said that. We believe it. We know from experience. And so if we're going to send salesmen in there, and they're going to be tempted, you know, they're going to be offered things of value in return for something else, we want to make sure they get the right responses. Who is it for? Conflicts of interest, gifts and gratuities, very important for purchasing groups, sales groups. Okay, so I know you can't read this in the back, but one of the ways that I used to keep track of all these different types of trainings that were either I had available online or were available on a face-to-face, either myself or somebody else could provide the training. I would put that down the left-hand column. And then I would put groups of employees across the top. So my first group here is all employees. Then I've got executive level employees, all salaried employees, all hourly employees, salaried employees just in accounting, finance, sales, marketing, and procurement. Engineers, R&D, and operations. They have some specialized ethics training. HR, legal, headquarters kinds of people. And then I had other specialized employee requirements. And then I would come down in these other columns, and I would put either each year that we're doing an annual training, or what I found is that if we went in a 3-year rotation, we would try to get 3 to 4 courses per employee per year, so that at the end of 3 years, if they stayed with our company 3 years, they would have completed 9 to 10, somewhere around the order of 9 to 10, maybe an extra specialized courses in some element of ethics and compliance besides the generalized code training, okay, that happened on an annual basis. So how do you keep track of that? A lot of companies now have learning management systems. If you don't, there are some other companies, outsourced companies that provide that, or maybe I'm sure that you have something to keep track of your completions. Keeping track of completions is very, very important. And I'll say, you got to believe the computers are right. But I had the experience of a DCAA, that's the accounting branch of the Defense Contractor Service, come and ask if I could prove a certain employee had taken orientation to ethics training. In fact, they asked me if I could pick a person, and so I picked one of my ethics officers, thinking surely they did go, and I knew they didn't go. So I went to, we actually had a paper record at the time and a computer record on a learning management system designed to keep track of completions. And the paper record was not there. And my heart skipped a beat. And this auditor's looking at me. I said, but we have the computer system. And everything should be on the computer. And unfortunately, yeah, she was there and it was completed. So I could prove to her that I had completed a system that would show completions. But down here, I would say, okay, 2014 number 1, 2014 number 2. That would be how I would schedule those courses. What the Federal Sentencing Guidelines really likes to see is this regular periodic training. So ideally, once a quarter, you would be able to give a course, say first quarter, this is your requirement, take conflicts of interest training. And the second quarter, you're going to be asked to take something on how to keep and file records management. And the third quarter might be something else. What some folks have a tendency to do is to say, give me all the courses you want me to take this year, and I'll sit down and take them all tonight. It's better than not doing it, but ideally you do it on a regular basis and you keep track of it. So here's just kind of another little spreadsheet tool that I use. Topics, target launch dates. When are you going to launch this training? When is the content ready? Who's the audience? How will it be done? Will it be done as a piece of communication in a company newsletter? Is it an LMS online training? Is it a face-to-face supervisor training or someone else? So that's kind of how I kept track of a lot of training, and I think it's effective. Another thing to think about in training is strategy. And I want to go kind of quick here, and I'll throw a few things at you, and it may connect and may not. So ask questions if I go too quick. But this is the whole idea of know your business. If you want to really target focused training where you can be most effective, mitigate your risk the most, think about your business. Is there an overall functional level training communication strategy for your business? What is it? Is it a report? Can you show it to me? And is there functional level creativeness? Are your employees involved in it? If you can get employees involved in actually generating some of the content for your training, how powerful is that? It's kind of like, we all can say going to Marian University is a great thing, but if Marian University actually has 10 students stand up and say, hey, come here because we love this, how powerful is that? The same way with the employees in the business. So how do you do that? Now this was a slide that just pointed out, think about your business in different regions or places. Maybe Indianapolis is a special, unique place. We talk about Midwest values. They're so good here in the Midwest. I can tell you that the values here, people are people everywhere. We get people from the East Coast, the West Coast, and everywhere else. I don't know. I'd like to think they're better, but I think the numbers would probably tell me we're just like everybody else. But maybe I do have, over here in an undeveloped country, I have a human rights issue. I don't really have it in the U.S., but I do have it in Thailand, and I'm doing some business in Thailand. Maybe I need to focus on trust over here. In 1 year, my friends and I learned a lot of what I know about ethics and compliance from Lockheed Martin. They were one of our key customers, and they invited me down several times to look and see how they kept track of all their ethics and compliance stuff. But one of the things they told me, took me back one time, I said, well, what are you going to do next year? And they said, well, we're just going to focus on trust. And I was waiting for the next shoe. There wasn't another shoe. We're going to focus on trust. And so they broke that down, and they had 12 elements of trust. And then they had games that they designed around how to build that trust and show respect, and they had scenarios. It was pretty cool. But you know, when you start to think about the big issues and where you're at in the world, know your business. So require an overall corporate strategy. We talk about corporate, the headquarters, the ivory tower. Okay, do we really need all those guys? I don't know. You need some. You've got business level. Maybe that's a division. Maybe that's a location level. Maybe that's, let's see, General Electric this last week. I don't know if the sales actually gone through yet, but they're selling their appliance business. That would be a business level. They're keeping their aerospace business. They're keeping their finance, their GE Capital business. But business level strategy, how does that fit in, and does it support the corporate level strategy for compliance and ethics? And then at the functional level, in your department, whether it be accounting, purchasing, legal, what is your strategy? I'm going to go through something too fast here. So here's just the idea of trying to focus on those strategies quarter by quarter. If you can write down what your strategy is, then when you go to a communications department and say, okay, we're going to write 10 articles each quarter. Well, somewhere we want to also somehow embed some of these strategies in these articles, okay? Kind of goes along with that. Over here, I was thinking of, Germany and France have a lot of special rules and laws about how you can communicate ethics issues. You need to be aware of some of those laws if you're dealing in those areas of the world. What pressures in the business cost local responsiveness do you have to deal with? Just some things here. And then this one, kind of point out, and I'll show you an example here for purchasing. So I really believe ethics goes across all the lines, all the business functions. And so how do you bring that to life in those functions where it's down to the individual? You know, what does the ethics mean to me? And I have a good example here of purchasing ethics. So if I worked in purchasing, I actually had an ethics officer who worked in purchasing and had a focus group that come up with about 25 different things that says if you're going to be ethical and work in purchasing here for our company, these are things you need to do. Avoid illegal and questionable gifts and hospitality. Carefully bid, negotiate, and perform a contract. Use company assets wisely. Don't engage in insider trading, which assumes that you're going to be given some proprietary information about different suppliers you're working with. And there's actually yesterday's paper, there was a fellow given a 9-year sentence for insider trading, and they caught him. A bunch of other people that worked around. Insider trading is being prosecuted a lot more now than it has in the last few years. Promote a positive work environment. All these kinds of things. Another one on here was treat all bidders uniformly. You know, if you go out to dinner with one, maybe you need to go out to dinner with the other. What does your policy say on accepting dinners? Is it a dinner of $150 with a, I don't know, $75 bottle of wine? What is acceptable or not? So it all runs back into rules of purchasing. So here's just a couple words on another idea. It's really an idea to create imagery ethics dilemmas based on actual cases. We talked about this a little bit, but sometimes if you'll take groups of 3 or 4 employees, I've done this where you have 2 employees do the role play while the other 2 observe how the 2 that are doing the role play are responding. So if you write up a scenario, and this is something that could happen in your business, and Joe is sitting across from Susan, and they're trying to negotiate this deal per the scenario, two other of your employees will be observing this. Sometimes when you observe other people, you start to see what they say and the inferences of how they say it, and all of a sudden it becomes meaningful to you. Just a thought on goodwill, and what caught me is, of course, the Allison division where I work used to be owned by General Motors, and with that, I used to get to the tech center about once a year. 2 or 3 auto companies, if I was lucky, 2 or 3 different auto companies in a year, sometimes every other year. We get to visit Fisher Body where they made the car bodies, or the transmissions plants, or some of these other automobile companies. And it was always interesting to me how huge the company General Motors was at the time. Of course, we know they were pulled out of bankruptcy by Obama here not too long ago. And then he started to become successful again, and then all of a sudden had this ignition switch situation. New president, Mary Barra, who's the daughter of one of the line workers from General Motors, very committed to the company, and now faced with this huge issue. Did they really know about all these ignition problems, 5 years ago? And could they have prevented these 13 deaths that they say were attributed to this ignition switch? Well, if you were General Motors, and you think about this, if you knew that every 5 to 10 years something, on a car there's probably 3,000 different moving parts. If you knew there's something going to come up, and from a product liability standpoint, what would you be doing now? One, you would want some transparency in management, bring the problem forward so we can actually identify and fix them. But what would you be doing to the public to keep your public image up? And one of the things that I've noticed in General Electric, I've often kind of scratched my head when they started to come out with, oh, did you know that we make engines for electromotive diesel trains? Well, actually, I did know that. They make them up in Erie, Pennsylvania, and they're big deals. They're like $2 million a copy when you buy one. But why are they advertising that on a public TV channel when they know you and I, we're not going to buy those? We buy a car, maybe we're not going to buy a huge engine.
It's past 9 o'clock. If you need to leave, please do. But please grab an evaluation form and fill it out and let us know how we're doing.
Wait, I got to finish. I didn't realize it went that fast. So anyway, the whole idea is if you're General Electric, they want to build goodwill in the public domain. So they want people to know they're doing these great, wonderful things, making airplane engines, so that when something bad does happen, maybe that reputation, instead of falling here, it only goes here, and then starts to come back up. So what can you do for your company in promoting goodwill now, knowing that something will happen someday? Final thoughts. Just a couple of these. Over the past 2 years, according to the National Business Ethics Survey, 45% of employees observed a violation of the law or ethics in their employment. Reporting was at an all-time high, 65%, but also retaliation against those employees was also at an all-time high. A lot of people are attributed with this thought here. Your thoughts lead to actions, which can lead to your habits, which can lead to your character, defining your character, who you are as not only an individual, but a company, an organization, and then lead to your destiny. So where do you really want to control? I think in the back when she started talking about how do you hire good employees, you really want in so many ways to get into their thoughts. Right? Get into their thoughts. Want them to think good things. So don't wait, prepare with a very planned and organized approach to doing ethical leadership. And I'll end with that. Questions, comments? I see you busy. Thank you for staying with us today. Thank you very much. Appreciate the questions. Oh, and I'll just have you revisit this scenario, take that home with you. You should be able to pick out at least 4 different ethics issues.
And Charlie, do you want to tell them about this?
Oh, yeah, I can. On your tables also, for those of you that may be interested, we're going to try to hold our first workshop. Integrity Leadership Partners as our startup company here on the north side of town at Keystone Crossing at the Indiana Wesleyan building there. You can see it from 465. On November the 6th, be a first floor room right as you come in the door. And we're going to talk about why everyone counts and ideas to help any organization. So some of the stuff you'll see here only broken down in a little bit more detail. We'll have some handouts. You can see the modules that we're thinking about on the back. We've got 4 modules right now. We'll start at 8. We'll have some ample time for some networking and some breaks in between. And the plan would be to end up around 3:30, I think it is. Yeah, around 3:30 with some Q&A. So if you have a day late in the year, want to send some of your people or yourselves, come back, talk about ethics. One thing I am totally convinced of, I know it's a fact, it's not an opinion, that the more people talk about ethics and compliance, the more ethical our organizations will become. And that's the target we're shooting for. So, again, thank you so much.